Good morning, and we're all up. It is wonderful to be with all of you. Very warm welcome to our guests, the former ministers in the first government of national unity, and also Trevor Manuel thereafter as Minister of Finance. Very warm welcome to Rolf Meyer and to my colleague Rebecca Davis, who's been at the forefront of reporting a very exciting week. Welcome to all our insiders of the Daily Maverick for joining us here. I feel really excited, like this is a good day, a good time for us. I know there are very many ifs, buts, and maybes, but I feel like we have a snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, that we could have been in a very, very different place in the post-election period of our country. So I thought to get from each of you just your responses to the striking of a power sharing deal last week, before we look back a little bit and then look forward to what we can enjoy, hopefully, from this government of national unity. And we have with us two experts who were part of that first government of national unity, or GNU, and we've seen very many jokes and cartoons about that in the past week. So if I may ask Trevor Manuel to kick us off, very welcome. Thank you for being with us. How did you feel on Friday as the details of that deal began to emerge?
Thank you very much, Furiel. We're sitting in a position, Tina is not we, Tina in this case is, there is no alternative. The only way forward is actually to have a coalition in some other form. You're either going to have a minority government that requires lots of belt and braces, or you're going to have the construct that is now being proposed. The document as it emerged over the weekend is an unbelievably good document, exquisitely drafted. I want to commend the drafters. I think it will start us off on a good basis. But the key issue is whether the parties can convene in order to build the trust going forward.
Thank you very much for those opening thoughts. Rolf Meyer, what did you think as you read the document and as we watched quite a high-octane gathering on Friday? Now that we know some of the backstory, there were still versions being drafted even as the speaker was being elected and then not being sworn in.
That's not unfamiliar, Ferial, that these type of documents take a bit of time to finalize. And I totally agree with Trevor. I think it was a great job that was done in a very short period of time by the authors and the negotiators. I think it's a good document. It sets the right tone. It's a good foundation for the government for the next. I think we can see that these people can be taken serious. I'm talking about the leaders and those that committed themselves. So to my mind, it's the right path. I think better in a certain way than South Africans might have expected, and it was done in a short space of time.
Really short space of time, Rolf, because the last time we chatted, we did an interview. You said 14 days is extremely short. And at the time, you weren't sure that they'd be able to get it over the line. In your experience, is 14 days unusually short for these kind of power sharing agreements or peacemaking agreements?
I think so, especially taking into account that there were no prior arrangements to the happening of the elections. I know of some efforts that were made prior to the elections that people would start talking to each other across the political divides. For instance, may it happen that there could be a government of national unity, and it didn't happen. So 2 weeks was a very short space of time. And again, it shows to me the dedication, the realization that, first of all, it has to happen. And secondly, the dedication that we're going to do it. That gives me hope. The fact that it went through all the motions at the last minute on Friday, and then the following day, and also the implementation already at the provincial level on the next day. I think that was quite significant, and we as South Africans can be proud of our leaders in those capacities that they acted.
Thank you very much, Rolf. And Rebecca, suddenly we saw this statement of intent popping into the WhatsApp groups. How is it sitting at the CTICC, which was Parliament for the day, and covering that story?
I mean, it was very clear, as everyone said, that things were coming down to the wire. We were hearing as late as Thursday night that there might be no deal. The DA was saying if they don't get certain things in place, they're out. So I think things were genuinely very tense. There was definitely an atmosphere of kind of charged excitement but uncertainty on Friday morning as things were kicking off. As you and I have discussed, Helen Ziller has written a fabulously entertaining piece on News 24 today, describing some of the behind-the-scenes machinations, in which she also made clear that one of the things that saved the deal was the EFF's Floyd Shivambu asking the Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, on Friday during the sitting for time to caucus, which Zondo was initially reluctant to give. He said, why haven't you caucused beforehand? And little did we know at the time that the DA was equally desperate for that time in order to sign the final declaration before the vote for the Speaker happened. I think it's a fascinating time, Ferial. I think it's so exciting for us as South Africans and as politics nerds. Just that statement from John Steenhuisen on Friday saying the DA resigns as the opposition. That is just a kind of mind-blowing reconfiguration of South African politics. And it's such a sea change for all of us to figure out what is that going to mean going forward for the entire body politic of the country. And I mean, I'm just so excited to see how this is all going to play out.
Thank you very much. Trevor Manuel and Rolf Meyer, I was researching last week, concepts of sufficient consensus, etc. And then I came across this wonderful photograph of the two of you and that first government of national unity. And there you were in the middle of the picture, standing shoulder to shoulder. Had trust been built by then? How did that photograph come apart? How was that government of national, or how did that photograph come about? And how was it to be in that first government of national unity? Trevor Manuel, will you kick us off?
I'll tell a little anecdote. One of the people who's missing from that picture is Pik Botha. Pik took out his packet of cigarettes in the cabinet, what was then the cabinet room, and wanted to light up, and everybody said, no, the ANC doesn't smoke in meetings. And he left the meeting, and the photographer came in while he was out. But nobody needed to actually work through the detail of that. There was sufficient trust, sufficient excitement about where we'd gotten to. Bear in mind that the deal was struck in the Interim Constitution, Act 200 of 1993, that actually set out the terms. And my own recollection is that certainly between the ANC and the NP, and perhaps even with Inkatha become the IFP just then, that certain ministries would be allocated, because I was told that I'd be Minister of Trade and Industry before I became a Member of Parliament. So that deal was struck, and then there was some people left out. And so on the morning before we were sworn in, an accommodation was made for the RDP ministry in the presidency, water affairs and forestry assigned to Kada, and a few ministries like that. But the kind of deal was struck, and I think you had leaders who were prepared to take their constituencies along in that situation.
Thank you. Rolf Meyer, what were your thoughts at that time, and what lessons do you think it offers us for this moment?
Well, let me start off by saying, Trevor and I didn't start off as friends. in the build
tell us that story.
In the build-up to the transition, there was a lot of animosity between the ANC and the National Party, understandably so. And it came over years. And Cyril, being an activist prior to becoming a politician, was in that space. And I can recall the first encounters that we had with each other. It was not pleasant. But it shows what can be done if there's a willingness, and if people start to develop relations one of the most important events I can recall after the swearing in of the new cabinet in '94, we had a Lachotla, a Bosberaad, as we called it. And there were social moments during that Bosberaad where we could interact at a personal level. And I remember Trevor and I, at some stage during one such event one evening, started to take the lead, and we staged a concert there of a kind.
Oh,
Nobody knew about it. But it showed how we became friends.
And so it was essential to establish these bonds and to get together. And I do want to go into that a little bit. But Trevor, I wonder if you could share with me, as somebody whose role I do want to highlight, just because she's so shy, is Helen Zille has in fact written, and it's been in the media at the weekend, that Phoebe Potgieter-Kabule played quite a crucial role in getting us to this point, in getting this agreement. Could you tell us a little bit about Phoebe, not exactly about her role here, but just who she is and why this would have suited her politics and her temperament? Huh?
Thanks. I first knew Phoebe in the 80s when she was on the SRC of UWC as an activist. After she left campus, she was in the Youth League and then moved into Shell House, become the Thuli House. And when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma moved to Addis as the chair of the AU Commission, Phoebe went along with her as an advisor. And I think this broadened Phoebe's horizons. I think that the canvas of Africa offers an amazing education, and I think Phoebe came back with all of that, and she's been self-effacing, unnecessarily so. She was nominated very strongly during the last conference of the ANC, and ultimately she declined nomination for the second secretary. And so Phoebe is there somewhere, but those are the kinds of people who actually deliver because they're not in the limelight. It gives them the opportunity to see, feel, and touch, and to use that position of influence. And clearly Phoebe has been phenomenal once again.
Thank you so much. Rolf Meyer, the quality of the negotiators were clearly very vital to this, to the way in which the statement of principles is written. How important is this? Because you negotiate processes like this around the world. Tell us a little bit more about the skills those people must have had on both sides of the table.
I think it goes back, Feral, to what we've just raised a little bit earlier, and that is the need for building relations. And you have certain people who are better negotiators than others. It's undoubtedly so. It's proven all over the world. And in some cases, you just don't put some people in the same room as others to avoid the potential conflict that people run into. So I would say that, I think we were very fortunate that seemingly there were people that were ready to seriously negotiate and develop relationships with each other. I had a little bit of contact from the outside. I was not involved with any of the parties, but I had a little bit of contact with some of the individuals, and I realized in some way they went through the same exercises as we did 30 years ago. The same concerns, the same fears, the same risks that they had to address in a different way. But if you're prepared to put up yourself to run a risk and open your mind and try to engage with the person across the table, then things start to fall in place. And like Trevor was referring to Phoebe, I think that's the kind of personality that you need behind the door, in the back seat almost, to keep things calm and steer it in the right direction. I want to refer again to what I told you in our discussion a fortnight ago. And that was the formidable role that Jakes Gerwel played. Once the government of national unity came into being, he was this backdoor person, backstage person, who never anybody on the outside was aware of. But he always played that role. And so often, we even from the National Party side could go to Jakes. And remember, he was the chief of staff for Madiba. We could go to Jakes and say to him, there's something here that we have to iron out. Please help us. Can you whisper something? That type of thing. And it came about, and I think people like that are required right now, also within this new cabinet that's going to be formed by next week or whenever. And can play that role.
Thank you very much. Trev, if you want to consider that, who struck you as those leaders of the time who played that kind of role that Jakes Gerwel did, kind of Monet characters who could bring people together, who could create relationships, who could help forge bonds? How did you keep it all on track? Because you came from completely different worlds into something which the world was watching. How did you make it work and keep it on track?
I want to be lighthearted about this and say there were certain red liquids. I thought you had some in your glass earlier, and we would sit down and we could resolve matters. We could resolve matters, and one of the characters who acted in a way that allowed the rest of us to convene was Put Botha. And when you stood together, and even Mangosuthu Buthelezi sang a song in Afrikaans one night, you begin to understand that things are possible. And if people want to move forward, then you can move forward. It's getting to that point where you actually unlock the energies of people to want to solve problems. And I think that now as then, the issues that impact on people's everyday lives is what should inspire this government. And I think the basic program of priorities must be detailed and resolved in that way. And I do want to make an appeal that, there are existing decisions. You have the estimates of national expenditure, which is that fat book where every chapter is written by a department, and there's also the strat plan of every department that remains in place. And new ministers have to be exceedingly familiar with those issues so that they can carry this forward, so that the basic minimum program can be implemented. If people come from the left field with issues, I saw one chap who described himself as a prospective minister talking about the position, but it's not the position of the individual. It's about the ability of yourself in cabinet. It's fundamentally important. It's the ability of yourself to lead the team of established and professional public servants. It's about the ability of a minister to lead a MINMEC, for instance. But it's also about a minister never forgetting that she or he remains a member of parliament and therefore should be directly accountable to the constituencies where they will serve. They will have a constituency office. It's about ministers understanding that they've got to do all of these things. It's not the fancy stuff. I do want to make a point that I was there in 2009 when a new president came in.
Yes. New
ministers, lots of them. And the first thing people were focused on was getting 2 BM7 series. Now, that's not what ministerial responsibility is about. It's about servant leadership in the best sense of the word. And this kind of induction needs to happen, and that'll lay the basis for what happens from here.
Was the election result a sufficient induction to change the purpose of politics from power to service? Do you think it's reset that axis?
I don't know. I thought that Ryan Coetzee was very generous in a piece that he wrote this morning on this issue. But I'm saying there is a TINA, and TINA has to be drilled into whoever serves in government and now we're talking of national, provincial level. There's no alternative but to find the basis for collaboration. There's no alternative but to put the people first. And that, I think, is what the leadership will demand of the circumstance. And there has to be a change. And I think Ryan makes a point about the ANC having grown accustomed to governing on its own. Now it has to do so collaboratively. It's a fundamentally important shift. I think that is seismic in the nature of South African politics.
Thank you very much. That's true. And Rolf, what do we have now that we didn't have then? Because in our interview, you also told me that at the time we didn't have a constitution, and that provides you with a foundational pillar. What else do we have in place now that you didn't have at the time?
I would like to think, Feril, that we are in a more mature place. Outsiders, people outside of politics, might not always think that way about politicians, but the reality is South Africa has now proved itself to be a working democracy. The last 2 weeks, if nothing else, have shown. And for that reason, in '94, we came together. It was the first democratic government. There were a lot of things that on all sides, people that were not exposed to for the first time. Together was also new in that sense. Although we were negotiating for a long period of time, we were not governing together. And now suddenly we had to do it. These parties who are now sitting together in this have been exposed to each other for a long period of time, over the last 10, 20, 30 years. Some of them for all that time, and some of them for less. But the reality is that, I think there's more maturity that we can speak about as far as the democratic state is concerned. And I like that reference that Tim Cohen was making a day or two ago. It shows we have some serious people in the room, and I would like to hope that others will follow, others will come forward with the same sincere approach as to what is required by the country, not in their party interests, not in their personal interests, but in the interest of the country. And I think the foundation is set in this declaration of intent. You referred to it earlier, and maybe we should encourage people to have a look at that declaration of intent. It was published on Friday, and I think basics we find there, the vision on which this is to be set. As the departure point is the main one. The imperatives contained in the Bill of Rights are there. So I think parties and people will have to make themselves aware of what they commit themselves in terms of this declaration. There will be difficulties, undoubtedly. We've seen it in 1994. In the end, it led to FW walking out of the government of national unity, which personally I still think, as you know, it was a big mistake. I hope the same won't happen here. So that
I think we're losing Rolf. There's that.
In such a way that people can actually will have to be.
Rolf, I think we're going to try and get you just to refresh there, because I'm having I think we're having difficulty both seeing and hearing you at the moment. Rebecca, could I bring you in there? I was on an interview last night where the presenter said to me, "Is this a government of national unity, or is it a grand coalition between the ANC and the DA?" Do you have thoughts on this? Have you been asked that question as well?
Look, I think that, for a start, there are pieces of political terminology flying around which have, until this point, mainly been used in a familiar way exclusively by sort of politics academics and nerds, and actually may not be particularly helpful in defining what we're dealing with right now, right? Whether it is a unity government, a government of national unity, a grand coalition, etc. What is clear is that the parties involved are walking a particular ideological tightrope with their voters, right? So we have seen President Cyril Ramaphosa be at pains to assure people this is not a grand coalition between the ANC and the DA. And Fikile Mbalula has said similarly too. There is definitely a need to smooth out things with the alliance, with structures within the ANC, etc., because there definitely is significant concern within the ANC, within its structures, about the idea that the ANC is in any way embarking on a kind of political marriage with the DA. There's no doubt about that. To what degree it serves us to, sort of quibble over what exactly this is, terminologically speaking, I think doesn't help us. What is clear is that both parties, the two major parties involved, the DA and the ANC, are going to have their work cut out for them selling this to their voters on both sides. I was having this discussion earlier. Those famous DA voters, for instance, who absconded to the Freedom Front Plus and have now returned. I think it's fair to say those voters are gone again. There's no world in which I'm sure those voters are happy that the DA is getting into bed with the ANC. And I'm sure there are wider sentiments like that all over the show. So how the parties sell it to their voters is going to be of critical importance. And I think it's understandable that they are trying to play a kind of terminological game there in order to allay concerns.
Thank you very much. Tim Manuel, how do you strike the balance between managing the coalition, managing the politics, the alliance, and also making a government of national unity work? I believe that interim constitution also created a threshold for participation. Is that correct? Huh?
That is correct. But I think that was then and this is now. And the first point I'd like to make, Firiel, is that Rebecca's observations about labels is so fundamentally important for us to engage with. I mean, there are people who call themselves a progressive coalition. You look at the detail of their policies on all manner of issues. Almost everywhere in the world, they would be right-wing, they would be Trumpists, they would find their place with Nigel Farage. They wouldn't be on the left spectrum anywhere. But in this country, people bandy these labels about. And I think we must be very, very careful about that. There's a question in the chat room about neoliberal policies. I don't know what they mean, but there's a gamut of new papers about what it actually means. What distinguishes Biden's policies, for instance, from anything that exists in South Africa. But we mustn't just bandy labels about. We have to engage with the issues that there are. And I want to make a point about the fact that we shouldn't make too much of ministerial appointments. Strategic appointments in Parliament are actually going to be fundamentally important. If you have this government of national unity, you need somebody from outside of that broad alliance to chair SCOPA, to hold the feet of all governing parties to the fire. That becomes an important consideration for Parliament. I heard Ellen Ziller say on television that if the DA managed to get the chair of the Justice Portfolio Committee in Parliament, they could actually drive a hard bargain on the implementation of the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. You don't have to be in the cabinet room.
That's interesting.
And so thinking that it's all about cabinet is fundamentally wrong. If anything emerges from this, I'm hoping that we can re-establish the importance of a parliament that is determined and active. And we've seen it at times. There was an MP, Ranto, who chaired a committee on ESCOM. She was phenomenally good. There was an MP, Chauke, who chaired a portfolio committee that dealt with the SABC. And there was more recently Richie Janki on the public protector in difficult circumstances. All of them have been removed from Parliament now. But that kind of voice of Parliament becomes important in constructing a notion of an accountable government. And hopefully these roles will be engaged with and understood. And let me just say as well that a backbench parliamentarian salary of 1.27 million a year is not anything to be sneezed at either. So we should get good quality people in there. and not think that the Holy Grail is all about cabinet positions.
That's excellent. So we shouldn't just be focused in these days on the cabinet positions, but Parliament is going to become a vital site of accountability and hopefully service to people.
Yes, I mean, in some countries, this document, which we call the Estimates of National Expenditure, and in South Africa, every chapter is drafted by the department concerned. In some countries, that actually becomes a contract between the minister and the department and Parliament. And they have to deliver on that contract because there are very deep commitments made. And you can only resolve a performance on that contract if you have a Parliament that's actually watching these kinds of things. I've said before, Ferial, in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, there are monthly reports on expenditure published in the Government Gazette for the previous month, published 15 days late. It has never been used by Parliament. Now, if Parliament gets up and engages with these matters differently, you can have a government that is a lot more accountable and much more focused on the people. Batupile can become a reality if we don't just focus on the ministries and cabinet, but on all arms of government.
That's good guidance there. Thank you. Rolf Meyer, you're back. That's great. The question is this a government of national unity, or is it a grand coalition of the ANC and DA? And are those distinctions important?
I would say it's not a grand coalition. Otherwise, it would have been only the two parties. It is a government of national unity formed on the basis of a coalition agreement. And the fact that some parties are not participating at their own will and voluntarily so doesn't mean that it's not a government of national unity. I think the intention through the declaration of intent all the time was very clear, and that is all parties are willing that subscribe to the foundation of this declaration would be welcome to participate and to join. It reminds one of where we were in the 1990s during the negotiations. We always said it was very inclusive. All the parties were welcome to participate, but some parties didn't come along. You will recall there were open seats for a very long time for the IFP and others who didn't participate. In the end, they came along, but it doesn't mean if you have an inclusive process like this that everybody is there. I think it is sufficient to say that we have 70% of those that have been elected in this election that are represented, close to 70%, I think 68, are represented in this government of national unity to be formed. And I think that is very significant. Very few coalition governments anywhere in the world can make that statement, or can actually govern on that basis. And just by the way, maybe not to your question, but a point that I think is quite relevant. What we have seen happening here over the last 2 weeks, Ferial, I think is a very good example for the rest of our continent. In the work that I'm doing in the conflict arena with many countries on the African continent, I welcome this opportunity now to go out to them and say,
really?
Don't look at us only with regard to 94, look at us with regard to 2024. Because I think this is an excellent example that we are setting for the rest of the continent.
That's really interesting. So Sudan, anywhere else, DRC, this begins to become options, which means there's also pressure to make it work. So Trevor Manuel, the sufficient consensus nearly torpedoed the deal at the last minute, how to define it. But I also read that Madiba he said that we should never get to a point where we have to vote, that you should arrive at a working definition of sufficient consensus that's conversation driven, that you get to it without voting on it. How did that work?
Once the norms were established, once it was clear that we needed to persuade each other, that across the table, we were all deemed to have prejudices that you need to transcend.
Yes.
Then you could get people together to resolve matters. There was actually a fair amount between individuals. I'm not just talking about Roof and Cyril's fishing. There was also a fair amount that took place to resolve matters. How did you arrive at the budget? And bear in mind, I only became Minister of Finance shortly before the Constitution was adopted. Chris Liebenberg did a lot of the heavy lifting for the 2 years. But it meant that some of us were drawn closer to the process. We needed to persuade each other of what was necessary. And I just want to get this in. Fidel, this is the estimates of national expenditure for 2022. It's a fat book. It's completely underutilized. And if anything, this parliament must actually begin to use the information available and ensure that we have better quality of accountability. It's those kinds of things that put people in conversation with each other. When it's not as structured, and you know, the interaction between ministers and portfolio committees, for instance, is one of those points that can be used a lot more productively. At the moment, or what has happened in the past, is the minister goes to an ANC study group, persuades them of a position. They go together into the portfolio committee and drive an approach. That's anti the spirit of this government of national unity. There needs to be an entirely different approach, and hopefully people begin to understand this and adjust their attitudes. It's all attitudinal. It's behavioral stuff we're talking about, and you can craft documents, and they can be as long as my arms, but ultimately, if you don't get the behavior of the actors right, you're not going to resolve issues. And that is the Madiba lesson on sufficient consensus, for instance.
Thank you. Rebecca, I'm going to give you this one from Mohammed Baba, but also Ruth and Trevor can come in because it is about us.
Ruth and Mohammed are the same person.
Are they this? Is that so? Okay. Okay, Bex, it's yours then. Please comment on the role of the press in 1994 in creating hope and creating a narrative and defining what was acceptable political conduct. I'm not asking you to go back to then, Bex, but what is the role of the media now? Huh?
So interesting. You know, I was chatting to journalists a lot on Friday. Yes. One thing we held up our hands and admitted, and, you know, the rest of the country will throw rotten eggs at us for this. The rise in Mzansi media bubble, we have to say, okay, you know, there was like a sense in which there was a kind of mass hyping of certain these smaller arrivals on the media scene to an extent which was maybe disproportionate. So we've got to also look back at our coverage going into this. Did we also take MK Party seriously enough? I mean, this is the question that American journalists had to wrestle with in 2016 after Trump was elected. And how do we deal with MK Party going forward? Do we stand by as stenographers and dutifully report the former president saying on Sunday that Cyril Ramaphosa was an apartheid collaborator, which he was not? How do we deal with what is going to be coming into the political sphere in the next few months? It's going to be, we're going to have an incredibly critical role to play in that regard, because there is going to be a lot of nonsense. There's going to be lies. We've seen that from the MK Party. At the same time, I think we also have to play a constructive role in, first of all, explaining to people what's going on, because we're seeing all the questions coming in, very practical questions. What does this mean? What is happening? I mean, I think there's excitement, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. So we have a role to play in charting that course. And I think there is also a responsibility to sort of try to maintain a kind of pragmatic optimism in this moment because of that uncertainty. You know, we don't want people running for the hills because they're unsure of what's going to happen. So let's cool heads all round, but also a sense, I think, of realistic optimism at this moment.
May I just push you a little? So the adoption of language is really crucial to me, because surely we have to, if something calls itself a progressive caucus and a patriotic front, do we just adopt that language or do we define? Because as someone who sat through many hours going through manifestos, all the people in the progressive caucus are the ones who are anti-queer, pro-death penalty, want to give more powers to traditional leaders over, especially the right of women to own land, etc., etc. What's our duty to to point out these things and to question the use of language, or do you just accept this is what people want to call themselves? Huh?
I mean, I noticed that some of our journalists, like I think Marianne Merton, our wonderful parliamentary correspondent, in the lead up to this was calling them anti-progressive parties, which I think is correct. So can we sort of caveat their self-appointed status by saying the so-called progressive caucus? Because you're right, and Trevor mentioned this earlier as well. We have the MK party led by former President Jacob Zuma saying they want to send pregnant teen moms to Robben Island.
Yeah, there's nothing progressive about that, I have to say.
Says he wants to do away with term limits for presidents. Economically, these parties may be on the radical left to a certain degree, but they also want to bring us back to like a feudal chieftaincy as well, which is extremely anti-progressive. So you're right. I think let's also please maintain a kind of sobriety about swallowing the claims made by these parties who are labeling themselves progressive when clearly nowhere else in the world would this be considered the case.
So Rolf, what did you think the media's role was in '94, and how would are you able to offer us some lessons in how we might cover this GNU that you found helpful back then?
Well, in '94, the media was very combined in their effort to bring about change, to bring apartheid to an end and start with the democratic process in South Africa. So we were very fortunate with the media fully behind what we were trying to do and bringing about the change. And I think something of that now. I followed the media very specifically over the last 2 weeks in judging where we're going, also from your perspective and your reading of the climate in the country. And I think compliments to the media. It really reflected positively in supporting this process that were led by the politicians. And let me remind all of us, in '94, in that transition, we were led by Madiba to build a strong center in the country, a center that could hold us together and fight off successfully the fringes, those people on the margins, left and right, as it were. And I think this is important that it happened at that stage. It brought about the smooth and peaceful transition as we had it. I sense something of that now today. I've sensed something of that in the way in which the political leadership of the country is acting. I think President Ramaphosa and other leaders have come forward very clearly in that space. It was a magnificent appearance of leadership, of statesmanship, but also of bringing together with great certainty and commitment the middle ground in the political space. And I think that is where the majority of South Africans want to be. And as we go forward, I think others will start to realize they might have made a mistake. But it's not for us to make that call. Only themselves can make that call and come to that realization.
Thank you.
So I think we are on the right track.
Can I ask some questions, Trevor? There's quite a few here on deadlock breaking mechanisms and how these were used. So did you make use of professional third parties for ice breaking, personal engagement, team building, or was it just the red juice that got things going? And then also, if you look at what does the document say exactly about how to deal with conflict?
I think that the document references a deadlock breaking mechanism, but doesn't define it.
Okay.
My sense is that the leaders of parties would be well advised if they paused, reflected on a small group of retired judges and got them to assist, because they're not players in the scene. They can assist in framing the questions that will break the deadlock. And my sense, and this is my difficulty, I think the greatest risk of deadlocks will be in the early period when cabinets have to be appointed and there may be some very sharp edges and very sharp elbows. And you need some people watching and facilitating that. And I think we have a wonderful crop of retired judges. I wouldn't include all of the retired judges in that category, but I think we have a wonderful crop who can assist and should be able to assist. And the leaders should turn to these sages and help resolve those matters. Can I just make a comment on the media? I think we have a tragedy in South Africa, and that is that we don't have sufficient print media available. And the problem is that we're dealing with echo chambers. I have a very strong sense that the rise of MKP was driven by an echo chamber that communicated only in a particular language that I shall not mention. That's the same stuff. It's the same theme that developed around Trump, Bolsonaro, and so on. And I think it's playing itself out here. And there may be some similar actors behind the scene. And in the absence of a print media that is readily available, you get a series of echo chambers, and nobody knows what other views are in society. And that I think is an issue that we should be a lot more concerned about now. There is another issue I do want to bring into the room. Sure. And that is a theme that I think has not been dealt with adequately. It's the political administrative interface. When you get to ministers that have a political role, the administration has a different role. They have to come together in a particular kind of way. It's a matter that we dealt with in the National Development Plan, where we said public servants should be immersed in the development agenda, but separated from politics. Now, the restoration of that distinction becomes fundamentally important. It means that you have to revisit the role and responsibilities of each of these groups and ensure that you don't have conflict. Actually, the Zondo's penultimate report, the Zondo Commission's penultimate report, gave a lot of attention to that. The idea of cadre deployment, Zondo described as being antithetical to the strengthening of the political administrative interface. One of the other issues that the National Development Plan also drew attention to is ministers come along and replace public servants who'd been in position with those who are allied to them. And so you have the continuing destabilization of the public service, and therefore exceedingly difficult to measure the outcomes and outputs. These are matters which I think need to go into the discussion early in the process. If this framework agreement is detailed further, I'd like to hope that it can be on those kinds of issues that you have a stable government that puts the people first and remains committed to the objectives articulated already in the public domain and before Parliament. Those are the issues that I think can make a very substantial difference, so that the political party of origin of individuals concerned should be less of an issue than the outcomes and the impact on the lives of people. And bear in mind that is constitutional. It's in the preamble to our constitution, actually.
Thank you. Rebecca, what are the chances of that, given how common cadre deployment is in our political landscape, and also how ubiquitous I found it reporting? For example, on campaign trips, I would see a government official take off his government shirt, under was an ANC t-shirt, because there was a cavalcade coming through. That's a big promise. Huh?
Look, that division between state and party is poorly understood, I think, across the board. But I'm interested in sort of the other side of the coin as well, Ferial, which is Sunday Times reporting yesterday, for instance, that someone like John Steenhuisen, the DA leader, is likely to be given a cabinet post himself. Now, I think anyone who expects that the mere fact that a department suddenly gets a DA minister will result in a sudden miraculous turnaround is really naive. You know, that person, as Trevor's just outlined, is coming in and he's the political top, but he's dealing with the same administrative structures, right? He's got director generals, deputy director generals in charge of doing the actual work. He's dealing with the same civil service. He's dealing with the same union constraints. And I wonder the degree to which, and I'm really curious to hear if Trevor and Rolf have any thoughts on that, on how a DA minister would be able to win the confidence of a civil service in our, very stratified political environment, and whether they would have any reasonable chances of making significant transformative inroads in cleaning up.
Thank you. Rolf, I was listening to Helen Ziller on Carte Blanche on Sunday evening, and she said the GNU needs 15 years to show an impact. It needs a long time. Don't expect quick results. What's your view? I don't think it has 15 years, though, huh?
Probably not, at least not this particular one. But I think it is a process. In that way, Helen is right. It is not something that's going to produce the results overnight. But if the GNU can set the right balance in finding opposing views to come together and unite themselves in the direction that they should go. And yet, Trevor, I would think that a very important departure point that they should take into account is the NDP, the National Development Plan, which was on the back burner and not even as close as that to government.
It was taken off the stove.
So the NDP can be a very useful document to set this process in the right direction.
Trevor, do you want to respond to that?
With adjustments, it is possible. I think it is also to Rebecca's point. It will be a challenge for a DG who is not a DA supporter to have suddenly a DA minister. But we've dealt with that situation also in '94, and I think if you have a mature person in that position, he or she can deal with it, I'm sure.
I want to make 2 points. Firstly, to answer a question that's in the chat room about the NHI. The NHI is actually articulated in Chapter 12 of the National Development Plan. But the gist of it is that you will deliver health for all when you improve on the quality of the service available in public health. Don't tear down private health. Build up public health. Focus on the infrastructure, the people, and the systems, and then you can construct a better equivalent. It's those kinds of issues. But the point about dealing, I arrived in the Department of Trade and Industry, and the leadership came to see me, and they were all white men in gray suits and gray shoes. And then the adjustment started. When 2 years later I got to the Department of State Expenditure, it was like that. And the then DG, Mr. Anna Smith, after a while said to me, Minister, we will actually make an exit. We won't all go at the same time. We're not running away from anything. We can manage a transition. And then we laid the basis for managing the transition, because what is discussed in the department is not party politics. I think it's fundamentally important, and this is why Rolf's intervention on the NDP is useful. You can actually articulate what that means, and you can build programs around these things, and you can build your own levels of accountability to ensure that you can account. But in the agreement, there are 2 issues that I think are fundamentally important that we need to talk about. The first is the one Rolf already mentioned. It's the Lekgotla. It's when ministers have been in position for a few weeks and they now understand what the commitments of their department are by way of a strat plan and the estimates of national expenditure and how they will deliver on this. And they then begin to talk as cabinet on these kinds of issues, so that the stock in trade, we have too little money, no longer finds resonance. That's the one part of it. The Lekgotla, I think, is going to be very important. The other, I think, is this national dialogue process. When that newly formed government of national unity is in a position to have wider discussions with South Africans about what the expectations are and where to get to. If we skip those 2 steps in the stages, I think the mistrust will remain, not only within the cabinet room, but also between us, the people, and that newly formed government, because unless you focus on the restoration of trust, the belief in democracy is going to be very seriously undermined into the future.
That's interesting. Rebecca, we have 5 minutes and we have to do the cabinet discussion because the biggest question in the chats. So we have 30 cabinet ministers and 36 deputies, and everybody is now saying, when will the president appoint a cabinet? What's your view?
So I've been trying to ascertain what the legal framework is here, and it doesn't really seem that there is one. It's not even clear if the president actually has to appoint an executive by the first sitting, the official opening of parliament. So it's not clear. Obviously, it would be to everyone's benefit for him to get these posts hammered out as soon as possible, because we don't want there to be a situation of kind of governance limbo. But I don't think there is a particular, I could be wrong, it doesn't seem like there's a particular legal framework dictating by when he has to announce that executive.
Thank you. Trevor, you had a different view in our chat earlier on how long this should take.
Look, I mean, I'm saying that Section 94 of the Constitution makes a provision for the president to form a government very soon after the inauguration. But I think that if the president tomorrow evening addressed the other political parties first and said, please don't ask me to proceed with the ritual, because the ritual used to be that after the inauguration of the president, all manner of members of parliament are invited to the state guest house, and they're told what their assignment is. And by 6 o'clock the following morning, those who don't make it trudge off home, knowing that they won't be included. The president doesn't have to do that. I think he would be well advised to engage with the political, the leaders of other parties, look at the strengths and weaknesses of individuals, fit them into appropriate positions. And then, because you have one chance to get this right, you have one chance to build the trust. If that isn't utilized because of the rush to get a cabinet in place by the end of this week, I think it'll be the greatest opportunity lost for South Africa. And perhaps somebody will listen and whisper to the president, we need, as Rolf said, the Jake Schervel of the current milieu, who can whisper to the president and says, can you look at Section 94 again? It doesn't seem like you have to deliver this by Thursday morning. Take a few days, consider this matter, talk to the other political leaders and get through this. And I think it will lay a better foundation for this newly found, whatever you want to call it, agreement between parties to ensure that democracy is actually the winner of this round. Because that would be true to the voices. That would be true to the voices of the electorate as well. I think that when you say the people have spoken, that voice of the people actually found resonance in the way in which the votes were cast.
Absolutely. Rolf, final word to you. Should the president take a little time and not respond to the urgency of the public narrative?
I agree with what Trevor was saying about that. I think it would be sound for the president and for the government of national unity to be formed over a limited period of time and not an extended period of time. The country needs certainty as far as that is, but at least not within the next few days. I think that is absolutely necessary. Last point from my side.
Please.
It's not only cabinet that is important, it's also parliament. And I think under the leadership of Toko Didiza, we might see a new role for parliament in the coming period. I think Toko can be very influential as far as that is. She has the stature, she has the personality, and I think there can be very interesting developments as far as the way in which parliament is going to operate in the coming period.
Thank you very much to all three of you. I have learned so much from an excellent conversation. I feel more capable and enlivened about covering this new government of ours, and I do look forward to another chat. To everybody who joined us, sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but we will try our very best to answer them and to have it sent to you. Have a beautiful day, all three of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.